Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Iraq says it is time for the United States to leave. It has been more than 20 years since the U.S.-led coalition invaded Iraq to end Saddam Hussein's dictatorship over false claims that there were weapons of mass destruction. Now, the Prime Minister of Iraq, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, has announced a tentative deal to see the vast majority of American troops withdraw by 2026. 3 Iraqis join me now to talk about the state of their country in 2024 and their vision for its future. Mithaq Al-Khatib is a freelance journalist based in Erbil. Hewan Omer is the country director for Iraq at the Free Yazidi Foundation. She is in Duhok. And Renaud Mansour is a senior research fellow and project director of the Iraq Initiative at Chatham House, and he is in London. Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
Hello.
Thank you for having me and having my colleagues as well.
Renaud, what is this deal, such as it is, that the U.S.-led coalition will leave Iraq? What does that signal to you about where Iraq is in 2024?
Well, the current mandate of the U.S. coalition in Iraq began in 2014 when the Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State, took over, my big cities like Mosul and took over a third of Iraq. And the government of Iraq requested support and requested the U.S. to come back, because they had previously left in 2011, to come back to help the fight against ISIS. And since then, of course, we've seen a victory over ISIS, and currently ISIS is a very peripheral armed, group that really doesn't pose much of a security threat to most parts of Iraq for now. And because of that, the government of Iraq has decided that it's time to move on to a different type of relationship, what they're calling bilateral or normal relationships with the U.S. The idea being that the prime minister wants to show that Iraq is sovereign, Iraq is no longer this case study of U.S. foreign policy, and that it can stand on its own 2 feet.
Do you think that the security situation is such that it makes sense for the United States to leave Iraq?
Well, I think there's, 2 answers to that. The very simple answer is that there is, the ISIS threat has reduced over the last several years to a point where perhaps, there could be a renegotiated agreement there. However, I think we shouldn't always look at Iraq in such short term. In the last 20 years, we've seen sort of conflict end and then come back and come back. We've had multiple victories in Iraq. I think every president has had some type of mission accomplished statement. So the point is, yes, right now, Iraq, from a kind of hard conflict and security perspective, is as stable as it's ever been if you read, Iraq body count reports. But that's not to say that the roots that lead to conflict that keeps resurging, those roots are yet to be addressed.
Mithaq, how would you describe the state of security in Iraq?
Well, there has been improvement in Iraq security compared to previous years. But I still believe that lots of issues that caused for a lot of young people to see a group such as ISIS as an alternative for them to join are still exist in the country. We're still talking about massive amount of corruption that only getting bigger. There is in the last couple of years, especially in the government of Mohammed al-Sudani, that is the freedom of speech have been really brutally attacked by the government. We're seeing a lot of young people being arrested. We have seen a lot of scholars being assassinated, and the government doesn't seem to do anything about that. And I think this frustration that have been in Iraq in 2013 that led to a lot of, in particular, Sunni areas that were strongly believed that they were persecuted by the Iraqi government at the time, found ISIS or such a group before, such as Al-Qaeda and other Sunni militant groups, as a group that they could join to seek protection or to find as an alternative. And this is in no way to justify joining a terrorism group, but rather that the government didn't work on the true basis and foundation about how to prevent that to not happen again and ever happen again.
And is your sense that is still the case, that in some ways is the legacy of ISIS in Iraq?
Yeah. I can still sense the frustration that was there within population before ISIS, that they feel very fatigued and tired of how their daily life is highly affected by pressure, by corruption. We can say that there's huge insatisfaction on the Iraqi government going in human rights, freedom of speech, access to information, and the right to defend, like in the justice system. There is like around 22,000 cases that have been persecuted by Iraq in the last few years related to terrorism. But according to so many human rights trustful sources such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, that a lot of these trials are questionable. And I attended a few of them in one point, and they were like 10-minute trials. And it's not a black and white. You cannot say that like the Iraqi army is now stronger because of the international support that they've been getting and the experience getting with fighting ISIS. That's mean Iraq will be safe. We still have the corruption, the persecution, the pressure on the people that plays a big part in that.
Hewan Omar, it's been a decade since the Sinjar massacre and the Yazidi genocide. Do you think that Yazidis feel safe in Iraq now?
Unfortunately, the situation of the minority communities like Yazidi in Iraq, still like we have that fear of the repetition of the same atrocities to happen again. Because if you look into the situation of the Yazidis after the genocide, while everything was publicized, everything was planned, was there, and when the genocide happened. But now, 10 years, if you look into the situation, half of the community are still living in IDP camps and displacement under meters of nylons, 2 hours far from their homes, without having any proper actual kind of plan that makes us feel as an indigenous communities in Iraq to feel that really there is a government who really cares about us, that we can either return back with dignity into our homeland, or what will be the future of people who are living in under 2 meters of nylon? What's going to be the future of these children and the whole generation, their education system? We have this fear, honestly, that this is not going to be the last time, because the minute you see the size of crimes and half of people still living in displacement camp, if you look into the ISIS members who participated or who joined ISIS members who were from Iraq, and we are seeing by the 10th anniversary, seeing the Iraqi making amnesty for those ISIS members. So it's very concerning for us to see this kind of steps that's been made from the government, that's ending the mandate of UNITAD and an investigative team collecting and gathering evidence of the crimes that were committed. This is not the last time if the same atrocity is going to be repeated. You
yourself were displaced, right?
Yes.
Where are you living now?
I'm living in Dohuk Governorate in Kurdistan region since the genocide. Since 2014, we are displaced here.
What would it take, do you think, for you to feel safe to be able to return home? It's
very important for me or for the community. If we look at it, those who committed crimes are held accountable, because it's keep happening such atrocities and crimes. And for us as a community, it creates this fear within us. It creates that if we really feel like we are linked or we belong to this country, or we feel trusting the state. So holding them accountable, and other than that, the place of origin, that's where we talk about the safety and the security. In order for me to return back to Sinjar, like beside talking about infrastructure and the services, it's also about how do I feel there. It's not about just building me 4 walls. It's about how do I feel in that building. So now if you go to Sinjar, there's different militia, different flags, different people fighting among each other, while we as citizens, we becomes the victim at the end. If anything, a group and terrorists like ISIS is coming, we become a victim again.
Renad Mansour, a lot of the expectation has been put on this democratic government, which is, it's a young democracy in some ways. How would you characterize that government? Are there growing pains when people talk about a lack of accountability, but also corruption? Are those the symptoms of a young democracy? Is there something else going on there?
Yeah, I think if you look at the trajectory of Iraq's, this democracy that was promised over 20 years ago in 2003, today you see potentially 2 trajectories. One trajectory is actually a move back towards authoritarianism. So what we've seen, as the guests have been talking about, is an increase in repression of civil society, an increase in repression of communities across Iraq. It's becoming less safe to be a journalist. It's becoming less safe to be an activist in Iraq. So those promises of freedoms and liberty that the U.S. and allies invaded Iraq for are slowly going away. And on top of that, we see a judiciary, we see a legal system that is also captured by the elites, captured by corrupt sort of interests. And so you have impunity across the board. So you don't have the rule of law. You don't have independent checks on balances, whether it's the parliament or the judiciary. And so these are the very tenets of democracy that are under threat right now by these elites who are looking to maintain their power. And in fact, at times, using laws and penal codes that go back to Saddam Hussein's time. So quite clearly connecting back to some of the tendencies of trying to develop a strongman type of system. So that's one trajectory, a kind of move towards authoritarianism. The other trajectory, as we've also been discussing, is that conflict in the last 20 years has been cyclical. And what I mean by that is you have a sort of an insurgency, whether it was Al-Qaeda or later ISIS. Then you have a military defeat of that insurgency, with the U.S. and so many international allies supporting the Iraqi government that, leads to some kind of seemingly peace. But those roots, which, as we've been discussing, the corruption, the misgovernance, the mismanagement, those roots of the social contract are not being met, which means that these roots again will spark into another conflict. So I think, to answer your question, yes, it's right that this could be growing pains for democracies, but, notwithstanding the fact that Iraq has elections, the turnout is very low. Iraqis no longer have the ability to protest as much, let's say, after attempts in the past. So there are the tenets and markers of democracy, and this could look like growing pains. But the two real trajectories would say that democracy isn't on the horizon.
What about a strong economy? What would that do to lift up the population, but also perhaps stabilize things? And I think of, in particular, just the oil that is a huge resource and a huge part of the Iraqi economy. If that economy were, and the benefits of that economy were to be spread throughout the population, what would that mean, Renan?
Yeah, well, one of the greatest ironies is Iraq is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Its annual budget could be above $100 billion a year, with 90% of it coming from its wealth in energy, oil and gas. However, because of the corruption and because of the mismanagement, Iraq is unable to provide electricity or essential services, medicine, basic needs to its population. And on top of that, the unemployment rate is only increasing, with Iraq having one of the highest youth populations in the region. Every year, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis are looking for jobs and are unable to find it. And so that youth unemployment is only rising. And sort of to add to that, it's a rentier state, which means that its economy, this great budget that has over $100 billion that barely trickles down to the population, is all contingent on the price of oil. And so if the price of oil goes down, the government is unable to fulfill its even the minimal that it is doing. And so it's, as one Iraqi politician said, at times they're just like sitting ducks. There's no planning. There's no diversification of the economy. There's no ways to think through how to overcome something like the price of oil. Instead, they're sitting ducks who at some point will have another crisis when that price does inevitably go down.
Mithaq, you said in some ways that frustration, and particularly around corruption, can drive young Iraqis into the hands of ISIS. What do they want? What do you think people in the country now want?
Iraqis has forgotten about the idea of having 24/7 electricity provided by the government. They wish for like having 8 or 4 or 7 hours constantly per day. They're like demands of Iraqis and their like expectation of the government because of severe lack of services, education, health, social support to the population have been really, really only getting less and less to these people. And in one point, people just gonna like break. They just gonna find that they have no reason to be loyal to this country or to this government or to its security forces if they get humiliated, detained, arrested, etc. And it's hard. Like as an Iraqi average citizen, you have no power against your government. You have no power against the security, law enforcement.
Even in a so-called democracy, you don't have a voice.
Even so, not really. You don't have a voice. And we've been seeing, especially after the war with ISIS, when Iran-backed group militia gain more power politically on the ground in Iraq, we've been seeing endless amount of young people and activists being arrested, tortured. It happened to so many of my friends and my colleagues. A lot of them had to quit doing what they do or change career or just stop talking. And in Iraq, there is no fixing of an issue. It's just maintaining it.
How difficult and dangerous is it for you to be a journalist in Iraq right now?
It's pretty dangerous, actually. It's really depend where you work. I have to cherry pick my assignments of what I can do or where I can work. There is a ridiculous mandate by the Ministry of Defense, for example, for me to access Sinjar, where the respected other member in the panel is from, to report there. I've been there. I need to get a paper, written permission from the Ministry of Defense signed by multiple army and intelligence generals, so I can just go to a town to do my work, and I would be followed for sure. I've been followed. I've been contacted by security agency to tell me that they know that I am here. So it's really to do independent journalism work. It's getting only difficult and only more complicated in Iraq.
Hewan, what about for women in Iraq? What is, in the wake of the fall of ISIS and under this current government, a democratic government, what is life like for women and girls in Iraq now?
I mean, in general, when it comes to women, unfortunately now it's getting worse. And specifically, maybe you heard of it, it was recently, there was in the parliament, the proposal for amending the personal status law and allowing the girls at the age of 9, for example, to getting married. So it creates a huge concern.
The girls 9 years old could be forced to marry.
Yeah, marry at the age of 9. This are some of the amendment and proposal to happen at the government, which we see a lot of support for that, which is a violation of from many ways of the rights of children and of education, of this mental health and physical health. So it creates, beside the person itself and the whole, in general, the women and girls in the country, this is creating a fear within us. For us, working in a women-led organization in the past 8 years, and now for me, it's very difficult, and I'm concerned when I'm meeting there's a place where I have to be careful to not use the word, for example, gender, or to use the word empowerment, as if that, okay, you don't use that because everything looks good for women. There's no violence. There's nothing.
Where do you, in the face of that, I mean, there are real problems, but this is also your country, and it's a country that you have great affection for. When you think of, yourself, but also that next generation, and I'll ask all of you this, but Hewan, where do you find hope in that? As
a youth in the country, as a woman, as a people who are seeing the challenges that the country are facing, we want to be a part of it, how we can be a part and share ideas and thoughts to develop it. But unfortunately, every time, by every decision or announcement, the only thing they are making us to feel about it or think about it is just, if you get any chance, just leave the country and go outside, because there's no point out of there. So this is what it creates, honestly, inside us. Although, for example, for me, we have a lot of thoughts and ideas and to share it, how we can be together, for the government to listen and hear our voices also. We are not a threat here. We want to be a part of it, how we can develop things. But unfortunately, it's not seen in that way. Only certain groups, or let's say in the higher level, will be heard, and the other people on the ground or on the field level will not be heard, or based on some reports, whatever they have, they would make decisions.
And so the advice to a younger generation can often be, if you can, just leave.
I mean, this is what they are putting us in the situation. The more you're trying to go forward, and then they take another step, 100 steps backward to make things harder for when it comes to the rights of women and girls.
Mithaq, what about for you? Given everything that you've said that is frustrating and is perhaps not going right in your country. Where are you finding hope in the future for Iraq?
Now, like thinking about this and bringing hope to question about how to see Iraq, it seems getting only difficult. And one of the reasons that I believe is crucial in this as well is how the Iraqi government and the Iraqi political system is so not transparent with the people. Like, we are kept in the dark, not only as a journalist, but as population in whole, in where the money of this country is going. Iraq budget for 2024 has exceeded $116 billion. And in a country in that size, with this money, you see there are nothing being built. There's still entire cities and towns that is still highly affected after the war, with minimal rebuilding efforts. And the ones who have actually being rebuilt, there's insane amount of corruption that went into this rebuilding project. And Iraq has one of the youngest population in the region. We have so many young people under 30 who cannot have access to have jobs or laws that to protect them. Like, there's no minimum wage laws that are implemented in the country. And these young people will graduate university and end up working whatever they can grab, work in a coffee shop or work as a guard in a building, when they hold scientific degrees and degrees that should make them progress in their own country. So they would rather to leave.
Do you feel like you have a future in the country?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
It's been really ridiculous what's been like happening to me and to colleagues. Really, I feel in one point our work here, it does matter, but it cannot make action because the government doesn't care. They can just say what you're saying is lying and associate you with ISIS or with the Saddam Ba'athist regime, and you can be charged. Just one example to submit everyone I'm saying, like now, Iraq is going through another law to allow the government to persecute you upon like personal statement that you would do in your online like platforms. I could say that I'm not satisfied about the Minister of Health work because of this and this, and the government can take this post I did and say, you are spreading misinformation. Even this is turned into a law, but it's been happening on the ground for the last few years for real. Like, I know lots of activists who've been like dragged away with the SWAT teams out of their homes just by basically making Facebook posts about their dissatisfaction.
Renaud, where does that leave the country? And where does that leave any sense of hope for you? You have a young population, as we've heard. There's wealth in the country. There are people who want better, and yet the advice often is leave if you can, and people don't see a future for themselves in the country. Where, if anywhere, do you find any hope for the future of Iraq?
Yes, it's a difficult question to try and now, try and find hope when what we've been discussing, with all of us has been, Iraq going through a recent history of invasion, occupation, genocide, repression of rights, and nowhere in there is any signs of democracy other than on paper. And so often, people would say that it's in this young population that's not giving up. This is the sort of the often what's said. But if you look at, elections are closed. People don't believe elections will bring about change. People have learned that protests also, are being repressed. Political mobilization is being repressed. You are seeing people, through arts or through poetry or through other mediums trying to have a voice as they become suffocated. And perhaps, in the future, this young population, does want, obviously they may seem ambivalent, but they do want a better future, and they might keep fighting. But I think, that hope needs to be taken with everything else that's being said, which is grave, everyday conflict. If we take it back to how we began the conversation, yes, Iraq today, you can walk around Baghdad and you won't have car bombings, insurgencies, and all of this. And so it does seem stable, but underneath that sort of superficial layer, you have this very dark and toxic political system that means that people are suffering every day with a lack of medicine, lack of healthcare, lack of electricity, and this will continue. So, we can try and find hope, but the trajectory isn't very hopeful.
I'm really glad to have the chance to speak with you all about this. Thank you very much and take care of yourselves.
Thank you
so much.
Mithaq Al-Khatib is a freelance journalist based in Erbil. Haywan Omer is the country director for Iraq at the Free Yazidi Foundation. She was in Duhok. And Renad Mansour is a senior research fellow and project director of the Iraq Initiative at Chatham House in London.